listener production.
Hi, Sasha Barbagat with you for another episode of The Briefing. Today, we're keeping the spotlight on the scourge that is violence against women in Australia. Our deep dive today is an insightful conversation with a man called Arman Abrahimzadeh, who lost his mum to domestic violence. And a heads up, his story is disturbing.
Unfortunately, my dad tracked down my mum at a cultural event where there were 300 other witnesses or other community members, and he stabbed her to death.
Now a dad himself, Arman is breaking the cycle and he wants other men to hear his message. Simon Beaton's chat with Arman is coming up in the second half of today's episode. But first, Antoinette Lattouf is here with the headlines. It is Wednesday, May 1st.
Hey everyone, g'day Sasha. The states and territories will sit down with the Prime Minister today at a snap National Cabinet meeting to discuss violence against women. So National Cabinet meetings were introduced around COVID, and it's where Chief Ministers and Premiers meet with the Prime Minister to talk about matters of national importance. So the leaders will discuss a range of measures to try and tackle the issue of violence against women. That comes after the deaths of 27 women allegedly at the hands of men since the start of the year. One topic of conversation at National Cabinet will be on how better to monitor known offenders.
South Australia has just launched a program that tracks violent criminals with electronic devices, which alert police to their location and help protect women from potential attacks. Now, Premier Peter Malinauskas is going to brief the PM and other premiers on the new scheme at this National Cabinet meeting. They'll also be discussing stricter bail laws and more funding for services aimed at supporting women and children. Anthony Albanese, meantime, is keen to look at ways to curb misogynistic content online, and he's flagged the possibility of strengthening the Online Safety Act and the eSafety Commissioner's powers in the space. So, Antoinette, this is in relation to people like Andrew Tate, their content getting onto the feeds of young people in Australia. I mean, any time we can ban Andrew Tate from something is fine by me, but I can't see that being easy.
No, definitely. We're seeing with X and Elon Musk just how hard the internet is to police. I do want to mention, though, that the No More National rallies, they had 5 specific demands, and that was they wanted a declaration of a national emergency. They want media regulation of publishing images of victims. We saw after the Bondi Junction Westfield attack that the mother, Ashley Good, had photos of her and her baby that the family found quite distressing. They're calling for family and sexual violence victims to have at least 48 hours after their death before photos are circulated, just so families have time to process what's happened or at least be notified. They also want mandatory victim blaming prevention training for all frontline workers. They're calling for alternative reporting options, including domestic violence, specialist courts where judges are trauma-informed and who specialise in domestic, family and sexual violence, and better funding so that many organisations don't have to operate on volunteers. So while it's heartening, I imagine, for many that National Cabinet is meeting and that there are some promising things on the agenda, I can't help but note that they fall quite short of what women and allies across the country were calling for over the weekend.
It's worth noting as well, today's Domestic Violence Remembrance Day, and there are vigils planned for across Australia tonight, and that's to remember the women that we have lost. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we'll be looking at how men should be talking to each other about DV in today's Deep Dive. Donald Trump has been fined more than $13,000 and threatened with jail time after a judge found he breached a gag order. So this is all in the trial happening right now over hush money payments made to porn star Stormy Daniels, allegedly by Trump. He's accused of this alleged scheme to influence the 2016 election by covering up a sex scandal. The former president was told not to criticise witnesses and others involved in the case, but he went on to write a number of social media posts that insulted likely witnesses and questioned the impartiality of the jury.
Yeah, look, Trump's not fabulous at following rules or necessarily thinking they apply to him. Justice Juan Merkin has found he breached that gag order not once, but 9 times. And in his written order wrote, "The defendant is hereby warned that the court will not tolerate willful violations of its lawful orders and that, if necessary and appropriate under the circumstances, it will impose an incarceratory punishment." which is basically jail time. So the trial itself has resumed overnight with testimony from Keith Davidson. So that's the fella who brokered the hush money deal with Daniels. And always keen for a moment in front of a mic, Trump said this while heading into the courtroom.
They took me off the campaign trail, but the good news is my poll numbers are the highest they've ever been, so at least we're getting the word out. And everybody knows this trial is a scam. The judge should terminate the case because they have no case.
Yeah, he loves a microphone moment. Look, it appears that Trump's team has also responded to this finding by the judge that he'd breached their gag order. So they've deleted the Truth Social post that violated it after Justice Merkin gave him a deadline to do so. 2 posts on his campaign website are also gone. But Trump has posted on Truth Social, the judge has taken away my constitutional right to free speech in capital letters. He also accused Justice Merkin of, quote, rigging the presidential of 2024 election. No, I didn't read that wrong. That's just how it was written. It was a spelling error by the president there. It's worth noting the gag order doesn't bar Trump from attacking the justice or Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, so he can go off on him on Truth Social.
There are questions about the future of budget airline Bonza, which has entered voluntary administration after just 1 year in the sky. So its entire fleet has been grounded until at least the end of tomorrow, and customers with bookings up until Friday morning are being advised not to go to the airport. So this comes after hundreds of travellers were left stranded across the country yesterday. They showed up only to find out their flights had been cancelled and there were no other flights for them to get on.
Yeah, accounting firm Hall Chadwick has since taken administration of Bonza, which was founded in late 2021 and, as you mentioned, only started flying last year. Discussions are now underway about what happens next for the airline. Some experts think the problem could be linked to the company's US-based backers, as ownership of the 4 aircraft in Australia has recently changed. Now, our aviation industry is dominated by this duopoly of Qantas and Virgin, and this could be the next victim, Antoinette, because as we've seen before, Tiger Air, Ozjet, Compass in the 90s, all have fallen the way of maybe how Bonza's about to go.
Yeah, and the Transport Department has established a hotline for stranded passengers. There's a number, 1800 069 244, if you want to know what to do or how to get to your destination.
And King Charles has made his long-awaited return to public duties after announcing his cancer diagnosis in February. Fittingly, he and Camilla visited a cancer centre in London, meeting with patients and staff. The pair looked well, and when asked how he was doing, Charles told patients he was feeling, quote, all right, and would be having his own treatment later that day. And we still don't know much, Antoinette, about the King's prognosis or what cancer he has, but obviously he's been deemed well enough to return to some public duties.
Well, Prince William has given the same sort of update that only a royal can, and this time on Princess Kate's well-being as she continues treatment for her cancer. When asked by onlookers at an engagement how she was doing, he replied, we're doing well. So we got an all right, we got a we're doing well. We still don't know what cancer either have. So that doesn't really shed much light on anything. But I guess the last thing we should expect from the family is transparency.
Yeah, well, they kind of broke tradition by even saying that there was a cancer battle for either the King or Princess Kate. Typically, the royal family in the past has, kept any health matters related to the royal family very under wraps. Yeah. Might have kind of said, oh, yeah, they're taking some time off, or, they're recovering from something. The fact that we even know that they have cancer is I suppose, different or not what we've experienced before. Antoinette, thanks for being here for the headlines today. And look, next up, it is a pretty heavy chat with a man whose father killed his mother in a domestic violence incident. So a trigger warning for that one, but it's a really insightful chat. So I encourage you to hang around.
First up, a quick warning before we get into today's deep dive. We'll be talking about domestic violence in this episode. Over the last few weeks, our national conversation has been heavily focused on the number of lives that have been taken by men because of domestic violence. And it needs our attention, as so far in 2024, every 4 days, a woman has died, allegedly at the hands of a man known to her. We know we need to stop the abuse, stop reoffenders, and protect victim survivors. But sadly, this is an issue where all too often women are having to lead change, even though it's predominantly men who are the perpetrators. I'd like to introduce you to Arman Abrahimzadeh. Arman had an incredibly hard upbringing due to his abusive father. Tragically, in 2010, when Arman was a young adult, his father murdered his mother while she was celebrating Persian New Year at the Adelaide Convention Centre in front of 300 other people. Now, Arman has dedicated his life to trying to end family and domestic abuse. He and his siblings have opened the Zara Foundation in his mother's name. He spends time speaking with youth in school programs and juvenile detention centres, working to change the cycle of abuse, and even speaks with domestic abuse perpetrators. Arman, thank you for joining me on The Briefing.
Thanks for having me.
So, domestic violence is an issue that is very personal for you. Can you share your story with us?
So I lost my mother to family domestic violence. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't something that we necessarily saw coming, but I guess now that I look back at it, all the signs were there. For me, I guess you can probably say that my story is probably similar to others who have gone through that journey and who may have lost a loved one as a result of family and domestic violence. I grew up in a household where violence and abuse was quite normal. It was quite frequent to see my parents argue. The perpetrator of the violence was always my dad. And unfortunately, everyone else copped it, whether if it was my mum, whether if it was myself. I've got two sisters. One is 18 months older than me and the other one's 10 years younger than me. So unfortunately, we all copped it. And that was the normal thing that went on in our family home. And it essentially got us to the point where we were threatened to be killed in our family home by my dad. And we decided not to take that risk and decided to pack our bags and essentially flee our family home. When that happened, we faced a number of issues. We faced homelessness, we faced poverty, we were completely isolated. And about 12 months after we had fled the family home, whilst there were challenges and we were trying to make it work and we could very slowly see the light at the end of a tunnel, and we could see a brighter and better future for all of us, a future that was free from violence and abuse. Unfortunately, my dad tracked down my mum at a cultural event where there were 300 other witnesses or other community members, and he stabbed her to death. And this was back in March 2010. Ever since, I have tried to share my experiences and what I saw in my family home to try and raise awareness and where we can try and make a difference to prevent some of these tragedies from taking place. We need everyone on board. We definitely need the society on board, and we definitely need men on board to stand up and call out certain behaviours.
How has this week where domestic and family violence, where it's been making national headlines, been for you? Is it hard to have this at the forefront of public conversation, or is it promising in line with the advocacy work that you're doing to see that it is making conversations?
To be honest with you, some weeks could be positive where we're actually talking about this issue more, but then other weeks it's tiring and it's draining because for me personally, I can't help but to put myself in the shoes of the loved ones who have lost someone as a result of family and domestic violence. But I guess for me, we lost our mum 14 years ago, and so we've had time to heal or time to deal with that tragedy, and so we're essentially at a stage, and I can certainly speak for myself here. I'm essentially at a stage where I don't necessarily want to hear talk. I don't necessarily want to hear us raise awareness or highlight that it's an issue, but I think we should be taking that next step, and that is what are some of the tangible things that we can do as a society?
Yeah.
We know when we look at different levels of government, for example, we know that the federal government has a plan. Here in South Australia, we've been pretty good with our state governments, regardless of the party that's been in power. We've been fortunate that ever since I started advocating, all of those political parties really understood and appreciated the issue. So but I think for us as a nation, it's about time that we actually see some actions, see some tangible stuff, and really for us to set ourselves a little bit of a goal and see whether if we as a society can collectively do something to try and reduce these numbers and hopefully in the long run prevent them from happening.
Absolutely. Well, yourself, you've spoken with male offenders before in prison. Why do that?
Because there will come a time where they'll be released back into the society and they will be a part of our society. And so just because they're locked away, we shouldn't give up hope, that we shouldn't just lock them away and think that the problem has now been locked away and we'll deal with the problem when the time comes. I don't think that that's the right approach. I think while you do have those men in a facility like that, you've got an opportunity. So why not engage with them? Why not try and understand them?
Yeah, what are those conversations like? What do you talk about?
I try and do a couple of things with those conversations. So I guess one of the first things that I try and do is try and get them to understand things from my perspective. So I ask them to put themselves in my shoes. That is, a man, a son who essentially watched his parents argue and fight, and it essentially got to a point where that ended my mother's life. But also I try and get them to understand it from and it's a little bit more difficult. I try and get them to understand what it's like to be in the, in their partner's shoes, or in their former partner's shoes, or in a woman's shoes. But I guess, one of the things that I'm very conscious of is that I don't want to be the person that is standing up in front of a group of people, in this case, a group of male perpetrators, and talk at them. I want to make sure that the conversation is engaging, and I try and make it a two-way conversation where I try and get them to share their thoughts with me, and I can share one particular example. When I went to this prison, I remember I had, roughly 70 or 80 prisoners there, and I was essentially trying to describe how my dad used to behave when I came home from school with a bad report card, or if I'd done something naughty as a kid. I think we all have those moments where as a child you break rules. That's what you do.
Yeah.
I'm a father now. I've got two little kids, and they break rules constantly, but that's part of growing up. And this occasion, I was describing that action, and I was trying to ask them to see if they could describe what that action was in their own words. And I'll never forget this, because there was this big gentleman, shaved head, tattoos all over his neck and all over his head, and he would have been 6'2", 6'3", arms crossed, and he looked at me. He said, "Well, that's just called discipline."
Wow.
And I thought, okay, well, at least I'm engaging. At least I'm getting something. And so I thought, well, let me try and pick that apart. And so and we essentially really pulled apart the meaning of discipline. And the fact that discipline is a way for, in this context, discipline is a way for parents to try and get the kids to understand what they did was not the right thing. But then I guess I tried to bring a little bit more context, and that was that as a child you shouldn't feel scared for your life if you are being disciplined. Yes, there might be a degree of disappointment, maybe even shame or sadness, but you should not get to a point where you are you're fearful for your life or the life of others around you.
Well, you've also spoken to youth both in schools and at juvenile detention centres also about trying to break this cycle. How do we do this? And I mean, even for yourself, did you ever fear that you were going to fall into the same pattern as your father, and how did you avoid that?
I did, and I guess as a child, what I saw in my family home, I normalised and I adopted. There were certainly certain aspects that I started to notice that were not right. And the reason I did that, or I guess how I came to that conclusion, was that I was going to my friends' places and I was spending time with them and their families, and I started to notice that their families behave differently. I'll give you another example. I remember I would have been maybe 12 or 13 years old. I went to a friend's place. We had dinner. And then after dinner, his dad came around and started clearing the tables. And that shocked me, because I thought, that's not a man's job. So even those very small things in terms of who does what in your house, I had a very, I guess because of what happened in my family home, I had a very solid view on who was responsible for what in the family home. I think I was about 15 or 16 years old when I started to essentially act as a physical barrier between my parents when they argued and when they were fighting, because I had roughly 2, 3, 4 years of all these comparisons. And I finally made that conclusion in my head. I came to that conclusion that what was happening in my family home was not right, and something needs to be done. But I went through an unlearning process, and I think I really started the unlearning process when I had my first serious relationship breakup, and that was at the age of 19. I dated this lovely girl for about a year or 15 months. The relationship didn't work out. She broke up with me, and I spent a lot of time analyzing that relationship, and I got to the point where I realized that I was essentially mimicking some of those subtle things that I had seen at home. And this is the controlling behavior, the manipulation, the emotional abuse, the jealousy. I was essentially replicating that in my relationship, and I got to a point where I realized that, okay, well, maybe that's why this relationship didn't work out. So from then on, every relationship that I got into, I was always mindful of what I said, how I conducted myself, whether if I'm repeating anything that I maybe didn't do correctly in my previous relationships, whether if I'm doing something that maybe I'd seen at home. So I was very much mindful of that. And I guess, I share some of those experiences with my audiences, particularly school students, because I know that I have captured them at the right time. Here, majority of the students that I speak with are anywhere from the age of, 13 to 16, 17. So they're essentially going through what I went through when I was in my teenage years. And so I try and share those experiences because I know they can relate to it. But I guess from the government's perspective, what they need to do is they need to make sure that the programs, if there are programs that are being run in workplaces or schools, if there are any awareness raising campaigns, if there is anything like that is being run, that they actually monitor it and they actually see what sort of an impact it's made, in 5 or 10 or dare I say, a generation later, because we won't be able to see that difference. And I hope that I'm right in saying this. I hope that the next generation will actually acknowledge what domestic and family violence is, and will see less statistics in 10, 20 years' time.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Arman.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That's it for today's episode of The Briefing. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again this afternoon with another episode. We hope you can join us. And if you did enjoy this episode, please do share it around and make sure that you click follow. We definitely appreciate it. My name is Simon Beaton. See you next time.
Listener.